It's so much more confusing than it used to be. So HAC has developed the Rural Data Portal to help communities understand and document their needs and housing conditions. It is very easy to use. It's click boxes. You can get county information. It's all pulled from the census, and it's presented very clearly for you. We are in the process of updating the portal right now with the 2020 census data that's been released. Please do check that out as you are preparing applications or looking to understand your communities in greater detail. We have also Veterans Data Central, which we hope is a simple, easy to use resource for all issues related to the social, economic, and housing characteristics of veterans around the country. We have a quarterly magazine that focuses on a variety of different topics. It's always interesting, and I encourage you to check it out. Our HAC News is a bi-weekly newsletter. It is now delivered online. It was once always sent out on these yellow pieces of paper, and people all around the country of a certain age remember what it is. But I encourage you to sign up for the HAC News, regardless of the depth of your involvement in housing issues in particular. If you read it every other week, great, or you can just look at it as time permits, and it tracks all of the federal legislation as it relates to housing, rural infrastructure issues, and a lot more. Finally, we have Taking Stock, which is a decennial report based on the census data, and we are preparing the 2020 edition. We really focus on rural housing conditions in depth with case studies and details based on regions. It's taking a look at communities over, a 40-year period. So it provides very holistic understanding. Let's see, moving on. Okay. As I said, we are a national organization. We seek to have a local focus. And when I was emailing with Katie to get some information about her objectives for this presentation, I was told that you all participating would primarily be community leaders looking to promote and partner for all kinds of affordable housing. Since this is a tall order and I have a short amount of time, it's my understanding that you all are in a variety of communities in Southeastern Ohio. I thought that I would just talk a little bit more about laying a foundation and how to position your communities to be successful to meet your affordable housing goals. Okay, main question. I presume that all of you have joined this call today because your communities do not have enough affordable housing. And why is that? Harvard's most recent State of the Nation Housing Report provides a variety of reasons, but several of the key ones are soaring home prices. Homeownership costs rose by over 20% from March of 2021 to March of 2021 to March of 2022, and rents jumped 12% in that same time period. Those are nationally. They may not be reflective of your community, but the impact is there and affects all communities. Another reason is that there's continuous underbuilding. It's contributed to this shortage of all different types of housing, homeownership and rentals as well. And because there is a shortage of housing, most new homes across the country are being priced at the moderate and upper ends of the market. Third reason is housing supply, and it can be and often is severely constrained by land use restrictions that increase the cost of building or can prevent homes from being built. As community leaders, this last one, though, is probably the one that could be in your concern, although it is more largely an issue we find in urban areas than in rural areas. The other issues, soaring home prices, underbuilding, they are largely out of your control because the problems are so large and complex. In a nutshell, the housing market is not working for low and moderate income people. And because we are many years into this problem, it is also going to take many years to address. So I just wanted to talk about a few key things that you should be thinking about all the time to address these problems. Your communities may invest in economic development staff professionals. A lot of communities, even rural areas, do, either at the county level or they can do it regionally. But not a lot of communities dedicate staff for affordable housing or housing at all. There's probably not a lot of housing czars in communities across the country. So that means that you have to come together and play that role for your communities and, lay the foundation and set the environment for affordable housing to be successful in your areas. I want to encourage you to really understand your communities. Data. You may think that you know your community well, but you really need to know the statistics and understand. And a lot of housing issues, in particular in rural communities, are not obvious. They can be hidden. There are family members, there are people that are doubling up. It is not necessarily as easy as seeing a tent under an underpass in a large city. But there are homeless people in your communities living in barns, living in fields, living in tents that you don't see. So please, take the time to really understand your community. Perhaps there's a shortage specifically of rental units, or, property managers aren't interested in lending to people with criminal records. Or people are suffering from mental illness and addiction, and that is prohibiting them from being successful tenants or homeowners. So you also want to go out and meet all the people in your community and understand the kind of housing that they want to see. If you can determine their preferences, you will know what types of housing your community overall is likely to support and what they want to see built and what they will use their funds to pay for and to live in. It's important to understand there is a distinction between need and demand. Need is relatively clear and easy to understand, and the data can tell you the need in your community. But demand takes into consideration what a household can afford and what they are willing to spend their money on. So you may examine the data for your community and begin to pay attention to where and how people are living in your community. If you determine, let's say, that young professionals would move to your community more than they are, but there are a few options for them. You may also determine that there's a concentration of elderly living in substandard homes that they already own. If those are the primary needs in your community and you focus on developing a 20-unit garden-style apartment complex with affordable rents, you're not actually going to meet the demand that those two populations may have. Young families, they do need homes, and the elderly need safer housing, but do families with moderate incomes want to live in apartments? And do the elderly want to sell their homes and live, very close to one another? So, again, the data and really understanding your community will help you to understand what opportunities you want to seek to take advantage of. When you really know your community, then you can begin to educate and advocate everybody else to learn about your community. Ohio is a large and diverse state, and what your community needs is going to differ from place to place. Manufacturing communities have different needs than farming communities. College towns, lakeside vacation areas may be growing, and some communities may be experiencing disinvestment. Those result in differing needs. And so you need to focus on your elected officials from city council all the way up to your congressional representatives so that they know specifically what the problems and challenges are that you are facing and how they can best serve you, the constituents in their communities. You can do this in a whole host of different ways. You can go to them and advocate. You can ask them to come to you with walking tours, but you have to understand who is out there that should be aiding your community. Because if you don't ask them, who is going to ask them? If you don't demand changes to programs that are going to meet your needs, who else is going to do that for your community? You also have to understand the funding programs that are available out there. I've listed some of the key ones for rural communities in your area. Of these primary funding sources, only USDA Rural Development does not adjust its programs and efforts based on specific priorities, but Ohio Housing Finance, the Home Program, the CDBG program, Federal Home Loan Bank, private funders, they all can establish their own priorities and they can adjust how they are funding activities based on what they perceive the need to be. So you need to understand what their priorities are so that you can be well positioned to meet them. And you also need to understand what those priorities are so you can go back and educate and advocate them on the fact that, maybe the way they have things structured right now isn't going to work for your community, or you've been underserved, so that they need to take a focus and prioritize your communities for funding in the near future. As the elected leaders or leaders in your communities, you all are, the best positioned people to bring all types of entities together. To be successful in housing development, it takes a whole variety of different organizations and different partners. Housing is expensive and it's risky. We're talking lots of money and there's often loans involved, and no one entity wants to fund, take on all of that risk and fund the entirety of a project. So, you have to know who's out there and how you can bring them together, whether you're doing it regularly or you're making introductions as needed, whether it's from housing counseling to supportive services to transportation options to building inspectors or whatever the case may be. It's your responsibility, I hope, to ensure that that happens again, so that the foundation is there and that communities are ready to move forward. And finally, I just want to encourage you to ensure that you're always looking and positioning your community for success. That requires really understanding larger issues beyond just affordable housing. There's a lot of other issues that affect housing in your community. One that's getting a lot of research being conducted right now in this post-pandemic time is labor shortages. And labor shortages have resulted in higher labor costs, and skilled laborers and skilled contractors moving to areas where they can command top dollar for their services and expertise. So if you want to engage in housing, if you want rehab, if you want options for builders to choose from in your community, you need to ensure that there is a strong labor pool there. And You may need to look at partnering with community colleges or vocational programs, or providing contractor certification courses, guiding people in your community through that are likely to stay there when they have the skills. Also, natural disasters are only increasing. You need to be very cognizant of how they can impact your community and be planned and prepared for addressing them, so that you have the greatest likelihood of preserving the housing that already exists in your community and being in the best position to respond when a disaster occurs. With that, I just would like to thank you all for listening. Again, our website is Rural Home. You can get a lot of information there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Yeah, the foundation that you provided really kind of sheds lights on, the causes and the background of how the, affordable housing shortage really came to be. And really thank you for breaking it down, kind of the step-by-step of, community input all the way up to advocacy. So I think that really lays out a good framework for the folks on the call to follow. And thanks for sharing all those HAP resources too. So definitely we'll add that to our resource listing. And so folks can go and follow up and, get on the mailer and kind of keep track with the news coming out of your office.
Thank you.
Flipping over to the chat, I do see we got one question in. So when is it anticipated the rural data portal will be updated to reflect 2020 census information?
I would say within the next month.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other chats right now. So with that, if you do have another question you want to throw to Kelly, just go ahead and send it through the chat and we can circle back with her. But now I'll turn it over to Alex. Alex is the founder and CEO of Opportunity Alabama, or OPAL. I'm sure most of you joining us today have probably heard of OPAL, but if not, they are a nonprofit dedicated to creating and fostering a statewide network for opportunity zones. So everything from educating folks on what OZs are, to helping projects find the capital, to really get off the ground. OPAL focuses on creating economic prosperity in the state's most distressed areas. So OPAL was actually named the best statewide OZ community development organization by Forbes, and continues to be a case study for really harnessing the potential of OZs. And that's all under Alex's guidance. So Alex, if you want to go ahead, if you have some slides, you can feel free to share your screen, but the floor is yours.
Will do. Hey team, how are y'all? So thank y'all for making the time. Appreciate the invitation. Fair warning, if I fuzz out or if my Wi-Fi gets weird, just let me know, and I'll dial in. We're moving right now. So if you hear an echo, it's because I'm sitting in a totally empty room talking to myself while I wait for the water department to get over here. So this is fun. Anyway, I'm sure all of you can relate, having been here at some point in your lives. So I figured that what we could do today, maybe have kind of two conversations in parallel. One is, who are we as Opportunity Alabama, and what is the work? I think, Kelly's presentation was so awesome because I feel like, and I'm really glad we did it in reverse order, because I would have so much less to say if we had not. Because I want to focus maybe on some tangible examples of specific projects we've worked on that are rural housing in Alabama, maybe as some case studies that we can kind of talk through as a discussion point. But I also want to talk a little bit more about, just while I have you, kind of what the organization is. I think that some of the tactics that we're using may be beneficial for y'all as you kind of pursue housing developments in your communities. So who are we as an organization, and what do we do at OPAL? This is a pretty good guide to our stakeholder groups. We work with three stakeholder groups: communities, project sponsors, investors. So from a housing perspective, project sponsors will look like LIHTC developers in some cases. It'll look like, in some cases, just like a local, in one instance that we'll talk through as a case study, literally like a mayor from 2 towns over who also happens to be a general contractor and just likes building houses, is our project sponsor. So it totally depends on the community, and as y'all know, in rural communities, finding a sponsor can sometimes be the hardest thing for a project. And we can kind of talk through how we think about that and some technical assistance infrastructure we've built out to help to solve that. So, and the last group are investors. So I've read this broad, and I know that a lot of you kind of are here to talk about, y'all care about opportunity zones, or else you wouldn't be in this cohort, right? So I do want to talk about kind of OZs and the way that we can layer OZs into some of these housing deals. And the PLDR on that is not easy. So let's dive into that. You notice in the first slide, I had a little, CGA icon that links communities and project sponsors. Well, what is that? Well, we've spent the last probably 2 years honing and twisting and refining a set of community development programming tools that we have kind of collectively now referred to as the Community Growth Accelerator. We have merged it into a structure. Basically, it is we run it as an 8 to 12 week accelerator style curriculum with boots on the ground project partners in each of the different communities, particularly in the rural communities that we serve. So our basic thesis is we work with a team of 3 to 5 people on the ground in each of the communities that apply for the accelerator style, curriculum, and this accelerator style application process. So a team of 3 to 5 comes together. That's normally local economic developer, somebody from the chamber potentially. If the focus for the community is housing, it would normally be someone from, let's say, the housing authority if they have one, or someone who works for a local nonprofit that does housing issues. But point is, the team needs to be people that can get stuff done locally, and then subject matter experts who are going to be able to identify sites, identify potential local issues that we're going to run into in the accelerator curriculum. We start a community by going out and doing a site visit and actually planning kind of with that community, what does your strategy to accomplish the goal that you want to accomplish in CGA look like? And while we're here today to talk about housing, CGA, it's really what I call kind of a community development problem solving program. So it exists, we've done in one of these examples, Livingston, you see here, we did a grocery store. In Marion, Alabama, we helped them to set up a revolving loan fund to do facade improvements along their downtown square using a USDA grant. In Phoenix City, we're working on actually a combination brewery and housing project. Yes, those things exist. So it's been fun to kind of work on a wide variety of projects through this initiative. But again, housing is the focus today, and we'll talk a lot more about that. But I would strongly encourage, for those of you that, I think the reason that CGA's work, we have basically created 2 tracks to the program. One is, we will work with you to develop a real estate pro forma and a real estate project. So, all of you know you need housing. I shouldn't be on this particular webinar. The question though is like, how do you get off start? How do you get from we have a need to here is the $5 million or $3 million or $10 million potentially investable project that will actually have to solve that need? That is why CGA exists. So one of the 2 tracks of the program is the project track. And the idea is that if you're on the project track, we will work with you and work with our team of 8 to actually build out a pro forma, build out marketing materials, build out a demand study. Evidence is the need. Evidence is kind of what price points you can get to kind of some of Kelly's points. We help the community think through with some local stakeholder interviews. What do unit sizes look like? What do kind of like unit preferences look like? I mean, even down to the level of like, what kind of finishes do you want, right? Like, so it's really interesting. And I think that if you're trying to get a project off the ground in your community, those are the kinds of questions you need to be asking. It's back to her point, local data, low data, but also you need to be collecting your own. So to that end, I would say, y'all obviously don't have CGA in your communities. So if you want a project and that is kind of your goal, I would say find someone like a Kelly, find, someone who in your community can help to partner with you to build out those pro formas, build out those marketing materials, help you run demand assessments, and help you kind of do very like boots on the ground, kind of hand-to-hand combat that we need to do to actually pull a site together, get it under contract, you know, build up the capital stack. That's another thing that we help folks do, is help to think through all those programs that Kelly mentioned, right? How, if we're partnering a local program related investment from a local foundation together with home dollars, together with maybe some dollars from the Fed, all channeling through a private or nonprofit affordable housing developer, how does that all actually come together to deliver a cost of capital that achieves the rent rates you're trying to achieve in your building? So that's what we work on the project track. Probably, yeah, 60–70% of the time, we try to go the project track route with the community. And what we realize is it's just going to be enormously difficult. So we actually shunt them down what I'll call the community initiative track or the grants track. And on that track, our goal is, look, like, there are some steps you need to undertake before you're ready for an actual housing project. And that might be forming a local housing authority. That might be working with a local community foundation to build programming to just rehab a few existing houses, you know, using a PRI or using some local capital to do that. Partnering with, in many cases, we've had an enormous amount of success partnering with local employers, especially, to give you a perfect example. Well, we'll talk about Clay County in a minute, but that's a good local employer example. But partner with local employers to create, you know, either local dollar incentive programs for those employers where they can actually, you know, kind of take a chunk of rent that they would prepay and use that to do a little bit of housing rehab for some single family homes in the community. A bunch of different kind of potential programmatic solves to this that don't require spending a bunch of money on a new construction project, which, by the way, given where construction prices are, is really difficult to make either workforce or affordable housing work in most communities. So, and that's, by the way, one thing I want to focus on in the Q&A. We talked a lot about affordable, but I think that I want to be clear on terms with y'all and actually maybe understand a little bit more from y'all what the needs look like in your communities. In most of our rural communities, there is very much a stigma associated with the word affordable housing. That's one. Two, and so there's some strategies we need to use to overcome that in some places. Two, if you dive into the data and you look at need sets, many of our rural communities, I mean, there's a housing need across the spectrum, but one of the places where it's most acute and where it's hardest to solve is in more that workforce range, what I'll call kind of, you know, 60, 70, or 80% of AMI up to about 120% of AMI. It's housing that's kind of affordable, so 30% of AMI, kind of back into what a rent rate looks like at an affordability level for kind of that band. You know, I'll call it, you know, firefighters and police, or people that are making kind of $18 an hour at the local manufacturing facility. Like, what does their housing stock look like? And in most of our communities, that's actually the need that we hear most often, and it's the one that's hardest to solve. So we'll talk about some strategies for that later. So that's kind of overview of what we do and how we typically use a programmatic tool we've created to kind of engage with communities. Let's talk about, and then we also have our own fund nested within the Oakland. So we actually have our own opportunity fund. And the reason I show you the screen is not to show you all the fun urban projects that we've done, which, by the way, if any of you are from more urban communities or intersect with them, we've got a great kind of case study in creating workforce housing in this project called Market Lofts on 3rd, where we were able to use historic tax credits as basically the subsidy source to buy down rents to a point where they are, in fact, you know, more affordable, people making kind of 80 to 100% of AMI. So every unit of housing that we're doing in that building is going to wind up being affordable. Nothing will be over 100% AMI. Most of it will be between 70 and 100. And it's going to lease up in like 2 days. It's going to be phenomenal. And we still get a great return because of the HTCs on the project. So layering different sources, kind of like, and I like to include this as an example because I think most people don't think about historic tax credits as a source of subsidy for housing projects, but where it's appropriate, it can make sense. So old schools, for example, make for really interesting projects when it comes to delivering senior housing. So senior housing typically there's a need for common dining, there's need for elevator, there's need for wider hallways, and like you have all those things in old schools, and there's typically in a lot of rural communities some kind of abandoned school somewhere. So we've actually got a couple of those projects underway in Alabama right now, where we've leveraged new market tax, historic tax credits, and then opportunities on equity as the equity source to rehab old school facilities into senior housing. So that's kind of a fun, and I can talk through a couple of those examples in the Q&A if you want me to. But I'll stop sharing and talk about Clay County for a minute. So I think this is maybe the best example of a potential housing like just how housing can come together, how rural housing can come together, leveraging multiple incentives in a capital stack to make it work. So Clay County is 15,000 people total live in the county. It's one of the larger counties in Alabama. So no town has more than 1,500 people living in it. So it's very dispersed in population. But it happens to have the largest private cabinet manufacturer in North America is headquartered in Ashland, Alabama, of all places. They're offering employees, I mean, it's, they are dealing with the same kind of labor shortages that everyone else is dealing with, and are willing to pay top dollar for entry-level employees, many of whom are driving, sometimes an hour and a half each way to work, not because they're living in these fabulous urban communities that have great schools and parks and everything else. They're living in equally distressed, equally rural places. It just so happens that those places have newer housing stock than Clay County, where really there's been no substantial new housing constructed since probably the 70s. And there wasn't much constructed in the 70s. So most of your housing stock was built between basically 1920 and 1940, a little bit in the 50s. Most of it was aging, 30 years ago. And so desperately kind of needs comprehensive replacement. So what we've done is partnered with the city and the manufacturing facility to identify some parcels of land that the manufacturing facility actually owns that may be rededicated towards workforce housing. We're working with the city to work through a series of, it happens to be an Appalachian footprint, which I know many of you are also in the Appalachian footprint. So looking at a combination of ARC, CDBG, and a couple other funding sources to run water, do grading, basically get the site completely prepped. And then we're working with a home builder, who again, as I mentioned before, happens to be the mayor from like 2 towns away, who is able to just build at a relatively cheap price point because he's local and because he's been able to kind of source a lot of his materials locally. So he's not a bigger national or even regional developer coming in. He's got just kind of a much better feel on local costs. And he doesn't need the same profit margins that they do because he has lower overhead. So we've partnered him with one of our internal resources who happens to be a development professional. She's worked with the mayor to basically build out a comprehensive development plan, schedule, budget, planning all the stuff that he's needed to go to multiple local banks to get term sheets. What we have found is that there are a couple of, there's some national CDFIs that we can talk through, Enterprise, List, Rural List in particular, that are kind of equally good from a cost of capital perspective, and are able to just offer better and more favorable terms than what we've been able to find from local banks. So long story short, we've got land coming in from a local friendly. We've potentially got some rent subsidies coming in from that same local friendly. We've got city, and we've got like national CDFI funding all coming into the picture. All because the units will likely be priced at a point where we're not going to be able to draw on. We're not going to be able to draw on a lot of your traditional sources of housing subsidy, like LIHTC, Section 8, et cetera, right? So we're excited about kind of that employer city kind of quality local builder partnership as a potential interesting model going forward. And that project, like we tried to make it work with OZ Capital, but at the end of the day, what we have found is that unless you've got a friendly local OZ investor, those projects are hard to make. It's hard to find national OZ capital for projects like that just aren't going to have relatively high yields. So in a different context, downtown housing, second story housing is huge for us. It's probably, I don't know, 30% of the projects we work on are downtown revitalization projects where there's a second story housing component. And in that case, we actually have found a good bit of certainly local OZ investor interest. In one case, we actually had a guy who sold his business and made like a just stupid amount of one-time money that set him up for life. We happened to catch him within a 6-month window, and said, hey, look, like there's a chance to basically create 20 new housing units within the downtown corridor to totally reactivate downtown. There's like 2 now. Are you willing to basically take a flyer on this? And the answer was yes, because that person believed in downtown revitalization. So long story short, lots of different modalities that we can talk through, hopefully in the Q&A, but I will now be quiet and actually let us have a full 10 minutes to do that. But we can talk through ways that we've seen credit pairings happen on particular projects. We can talk through how we're thinking about senior housing. We can talk through how we're thinking about second story housing. We can talk through how we're thinking about single family in more rural places. We can talk through how we're thinking about multifamily in more rural places. Wherever y'all want to take the conversation, happy to do it.
Thanks, Alex. I hope your water situation at the house gets sorted out soon. But I do appreciate you pointing out the importance of creating your on-the-ground team. And actually, we've got a question in the chat. It's kind of along that line. He says, in the event that your area adopts or establishes a CGA and the group of 3 to 5 described is formed, who does this group govern itself? How does this group govern itself and work with other community stakeholders and partners?
So to be totally clear, Community Growth Accelerator is it is a technical assistance program that, thanks to some great funding from EDA and ARC, we as a 8-person OPAL team are able to provide to communities in Alabama. So I think that I think I understand the question.
Alex, I think we lost your audio.
No. Still nothing. Hello.
Oh, that's good. We're good.
Okay. That was random. So okay, just yell at me again if that happens. So in the Ohio, I would say set clear expectations. So for the region.
Lost you again.
Just let me know. I'm just gonna keep talking until y'all can hear me. Oh Lord. Oh well.
Doesn't want to hear your answer.
No, do I just need to type it out? Good grief. Okay.
We got you now.
Okay, really quick.
Yeah. Got you now.
Create a team that create parameters and intentionality around a defined window of time in which you're going to solve this problem. That has been why CGA works. It's because you get, a group of people, all of them are dedicated to making a change, all agreed upon we're all going to carve out, and this is what we make everyone sign an agreement when they start up CGA. It's you're going to carve out a half an hour a week to be on a call once a week for 12 weeks. And you're going to commit to, 4 hours at the start and 4 hours at the end to kind of to set it up and then to close it out. And obviously for your community, that might be 4 months, might be 6 months, might be whatever, but make everyone who's in that group intentionally commit to a certain period of time with a end deliverable of here, we're going to have a written 5-page solution to this problem, complete with the location we're going to solve it in, the partners who need to be at the table, both from a financing perspective and from an incentives perspective, and from just a local participant perspective too. The housing type, the data behind it, the demand information, the model around how it's going to work, line those deliverables out And then everyone in that group commits to having them done by the end of the period, and then have all that in writing at the start. So like, that's how I would set it up if I were y'all, absent a structure like ours. And then by the way, and then find like, you know, Kelly or someone else who really knows housing to be your expert person that hops on with you every week for that period to help guide you through.
Thanks, Alex. I'm not seeing anything else coming through the chat. Let's see. Give people a couple minutes if they want to, if they're typing their question. But in the meantime, I will throw up just our contact info. If you have any questions after you've let today's session kind of sink in, go ahead and shoot us an email or throw it into that FAQ page. That QR code's on your screen there. We will be uploading this session into that resources folder as well. You can also see that link on your screen. Not seeing any other questions coming through the chat, but I just want to thank both Kelly and Alex for taking time out of their day and kind of giving us some more insight into housing development in rural areas. And again, any questions, send them our way. We can forward them off to, you know, either Kelly or Alex or whoever else, you know, we need to bring to the table. Oh, we got another question here. What are our speakers' thoughts on Yellow Springs and Dave Chappelle investment?
I can tell you that I have heard of it, but I really have not followed the details on it. Once I know a little more, I'm sure to have some opinions. I don't know. I apologize that I don't know more.
I am now frantically Googling this because I have.
We've got a follow-up chat. Hold on. Specifically with thought on affordable housing, how do you couple affordable housing with workforce development?
In general, I can't speak specifically to a Yellow Springs, you know, case study or example that's going on, but the two things definitely go hand in hand. If you are looking to increase your workforce or bring businesses to your community to increase, you know, whatever the activities are that you're looking for economic development wise, one of the key hindrances in being able to accomplish that in a lot of smaller communities or smaller cities is availability of housing. People don't want to relocate to an area where their employees are going to have to drive 30 or 45 minutes to get to work. So in those instances, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So when communities can demonstrate that they're working on the two things together, that if economic development comes, if workforce housing is cultivated, the housing will be there, some level of housing will be there, and support for housing will be there. Those workforce initiatives can be more successful.
Thanks, Kelly. Not seeing any other questions coming through the chat. And we are kind of got just a couple minutes left. But again, our contact info is up there. And just, you know, thank you again to the speakers and thank you all for coming on today. And we hope this was helpful. We release you. Thank you all for coming.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.